They laughed when Keanu Reeves stepped onto the mat in jeans and a t-shirt, thinking he was just another celebrity playing hero. But as the crowd mocked him and the cocky instructor circled like a predator, Keanu stood still and silent. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it changed the meaning of strength forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The gymnasium buzzed with restless energy. It smelled faintly of floor polish, old sweat, and the popcorn bags some of the parents carried. The bleachers were packed mothers, fathers, teachers, kids in crisp white gis, fidgeting nervously, sneakers tapping against the metal benches. Bright banners hung above the crowd, declaring in bold red letters, Community Martial Arts Festival, Empowering at-Risk Youth. It wasn't just a slogan. For the kids from the neighborhood, this was more than a performance. It was a lifeline. For some, the only place they felt safe. The stage was simple. Blue mats laid out at the center of the gym, with a row of nervous students lined up along the edges. Off to the side, a portable speaker blasted energetic music. A local announcer, breathless and overly excited, hyped the event as the crowd settled in for the next act. Then came the name that got everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our special guest, the one and only Mr. Keanu Reeves. There was a pause, then scattered applause. A few cheers from the kids who recognized him. But many of the parents and local instructors just blinked, unsure. What was a movie star doing here? This wasn't Hollywood. It was a school gym in a rough part of the city. Keanu walked slowly onto the mat. No fancy gi, no belt. Just a black t-shirt, dark jeans, and old sneakers. He looked almost too ordinary. But his presence carried a calm weight, like someone who wasn't there to perform but to witness. The applause faded quickly. From the corner of the mat, a tall, well-built instructor with gelled-back blonde hair stepped forward. His name was Blake, one of the newer hires at the dojo, flashy, confident, and all about image. He wore a pristine white gi with golden embroidery on the back that read, Instructor Blake. He had already dazzled the crowd with spinning kicks and flying knee strikes earlier in the day, grinning as he winked to the moms in the front row. Now, as Keanu stood on the mat, Blake strutted toward him with a theatrical swagger. He carried 2 foam practice swords and offered one with an exaggerated bow. "Let's give the audience a little treat," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "Show us some movie magic, Mr. Reeves." A few chuckles rippled through the bleachers. Someone in the back whispered, "This should be good." Another voice muttered, "I hope he doesn't get hurt." Keanu took the foam sword without a word. His face didn't move. Not a smirk, not a glare. Just stillness. His eyes scanned the bleachers slowly. Kids watching wide-eyed, some sitting on their knees to get a better view. He nodded gently at a little girl in the front row who waved at him. Then, he turned back to Blake and stood completely still, sword down at his side. Blake laughed. "You gonna meditate us into submission?" More laughter from the crowd. Parents smirked. A few pulled out their phones to film what they assumed would be a hilarious clip. Blake twirled his foam sword like a baton, making exaggerated whooshing sounds as he danced in a wide circle around Keanu. Every step was performed, designed to entertain, to impress. His students watched nervously from the sidelines. They had seen Blake's ego flare up before, but never like this. Today, he wasn't just putting on a show. He was hunting for a moment to humiliate someone famous and steal the spotlight. Keanu didn't flinch. He stood there like a tree rooted to the mat, calm, grounded. His sword remained low. His eyes never left Blake's. "Come on," Blake teased, taking a step closer. "What's the matter? Forgot your choreography?" More laughter. A few teenagers in the bleachers began filming. Someone muttered, "Guess he's not so tough without stunt wires." Blake made his move. He lunged in, not with real intention to hurt, but with a flourish, an overhead swing designed to force a reaction, to make Keanu stumble or flinch in front of the crowd. Keanu stepped slightly to the side, barely moved. Blake's foam blade cut through the air harmlessly. Then silence. Not the kind that's empty, the kind that feels heavy. A second passed, then two. Blake turned, annoyed. "Lucky dodge," he said. Keanu finally raised his foam sword, but not to strike. He held it with both hands, then slowly lowered it, bowing slightly toward Blake, a gesture of respect. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. Some laughed again, unsure. One parent near the front crossed their arms. "What is this? Some Zen thing?" From the side of the mat, a soft voice whispered, "He's being real." It was a little girl in a white gi, about 9 years old, sitting cross-legged next to her classmates. Her name was Maya. She watched with a focused intensity far beyond her years. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She understood something the adults didn't. Keanu straightened up and looked at Blake. "Would you like to go again?" he asked, his voice even, calm. Blake blinked. He hadn't expected that. "Sure," he replied, this time with less bravado. He lunged again, a quick swing at Keanu's midsection, and again Keanu moved just enough, redirecting with his body, not even needing to block. Blake's momentum carried him forward off balance. Keanu didn't strike. He simply turned and took a step back. Another silence. This one deeper. There was no applause, no cheers, just quiet confusion. Who was really in control here? Blake's grin faded slightly. His chest heaved. His eyes narrowed. Keanu stood, waiting, silent, focused. The crowd thought they were watching a performance, but something was shifting. They just didn't know it yet, and the ones who had laughed the loudest were about to fall silent. A man in the front row leaned over to his wife and whispered, "Why isn't he fighting back?" She shrugged. "Maybe he's scared." But Maya, still seated cross-legged on the floor, whispered to no one in particular, "He's not scared. He's waiting." On the mat, Blake rolled his shoulders, trying to shake off the growing discomfort crawling under his skin. He could feel the attention drifting, feel the laughter thinning. His tricks weren't landing anymore. The crowd wasn't looking at him. They were watching Keanu. He stepped in again. This time, faster. He launched a flurry of strikes, foam sword slashing left, right, overhead. Keanu deflected one with a soft parry, dodged the next, turned slightly, always just out of reach. No retaliation, no escalation, only control. Then it happened. Blake overcommitted. His footing shifted, and he stumbled forward. Not a full fall, but enough to send a ripple through the room. A few people gasped. A few kids stopped chewing their snacks. Keanu didn't move to exploit it. He didn't raise his weapon. He simply extended one hand to steady Blake's shoulder before he could fall. Then stepped back. No words, just that same calm, centered presence. Blake froze, humiliated. His cheeks burned red. He turned to the crowd and forced a grin. "Let's hear it for Hollywood." A few people clapped out of awkwardness. Most stayed silent. They didn't understand what they had just witnessed, but they felt something shift. Keanu bowed once more, this time to the audience. And finally, he spoke. "Thank you for letting me be part of your day." Then he walked off the mat, leaving Blake standing alone beneath the fluorescent lights. Maya's voice cut through the silence. He didn't need to win. He already had. Her instructor turned to look at her, surprised. But the little girl didn't flinch. Her eyes remained locked on Keanu, who now stood by the edge of the gym, shaking hands with an older man in a folding chair. No one was laughing anymore. No one was mocking him. And though the crowd didn't yet realize it, something inside them had changed. The air had changed. The energy, the mood, the unspoken code of what power looked like, it had all shifted. Not with noise, not with force, but with stillness, with respect, with restraint. The camera phones were still rolling. The footage would go viral within hours. But the most powerful part of the moment wouldn't be what the cameras captured. It would be the silence, because that silence held everything they didn't expect from a man they thought they knew. They had no idea what was coming. Not yet. But they were about to learn. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Keanu's quiet home as he sat at the edge of his kitchen table sipping black coffee, a thick envelope in his hand. The handwriting on the front was uneven, the kind that belonged to a child still learning to make letters stand straight. It had arrived 2 days earlier, forwarded from his team. Normally, fan mail came in stacks, often unread, but this one had been set apart, marked with a sticky note from his assistant. "You may want to read this." Inside was a letter written in blue crayon. "Dear Mr. Reeves, my name is Maya. I'm 9 years old. I go to Grand Oak Martial Arts School. My dad died 2 years ago in the Army. He told me before he went that strong people protect others. I want to be strong like him, but our school is small and it might close. We don't have money. We heard you did judo in the movies. My teacher says you're real nice in person. Could you come watch us? Even just once? I'll try really hard. I promise. Love." Maya. Underneath the signature was a hand-drawn picture of a girl with a ponytail doing a sidekick, standing beside a tall man with long hair holding flowers. Above it, in bright letters, "Believe in strength." Keanu stared at the letter for a long time. Then he quietly folded it, tucked it into his pocket, and picked up his phone. That afternoon he arrived at the school unannounced. The Grand Oak Martial Arts School was tucked into a forgotten strip mall wedged between a closed-down laundromat and a pawn shop. Its windows were fogged, the signage faded and chipped. Inside, the mats were worn, the mirrors cracked in a few places. But the spirit of the room was alive. A group of kids practiced in unison, their small voices shouting "Ki" with every punch. The instructor, an older black man named Mr. Harris, paused when he saw Keanu walk in. He blinked twice, removed his glasses, and said, "Is that who I think it is?" Keanu smiled gently and extended his hand. "I got Maya's letter." Mr. Harris's eyes welled up. He nodded. "She writes those letters, hoping someone listens. You actually did." Maya, across the room, saw him and gasped. She didn't scream or run. She just stood there, stunned, clutching her belt like it might hold her to the ground. Keanu knelt and opened his arms. She walked slowly, then ran. He hugged her tightly. "You came," she whispered. "I told you I would try really hard," she added with a nervous laugh. Keanu looked at her and said, "And I told you I read your letter. That makes 2 promises kept." She grinned, missing a front tooth. Her cheeks flushed with pride. It was in that moment, kneeling in the middle of a faded dojo, next to a child who had lost more than most adults ever, that Keanu understood exactly why he was there. "Mr. Harris led Keanu into his small office near the back of the school. It was barely larger than a supply closet. Stacks of old tournament trophies lined one shelf, most covered in dust. Framed newspaper clippings from 20 years ago sat slightly crooked on the walls. One featured a younger Harris in a black belt, standing beside his old master. The caption read, "Discipline before victory." Keanu glanced at it and smiled. "She's got your heart," he said, nodding toward the mats, where Maya was now helping another student tie their belt. "She's got her father's heart," Harris replied, voice low. "He was one of my students. Joined the military right after high school. Killed overseas. Maya was 5. Keanu sat down, his expression softening. "She told me in the letter. She wrote like someone twice her age. She trains like someone twice her age too," Harris said. "But I don't know how much longer we'll be here." He opened a drawer and pulled out a binder. Inside were overdue bills, eviction notices, insurance lapses. The dojo was weeks away from shutting its doors. "We used to be full. 10 years ago I had a waiting list," Harris explained. "Now it's just me, a part-time helper, and whatever parents can scrape together." Then Blake came along. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Blake?" "Blake Harris. No relation. Moved here from California a few months ago. Said he could modernize things, bring in more people, flashy stuff, TikTok ready. The kids loved it at first, but it's not the kind of martial arts I was taught to share." Keanu looked out the window into the training area. Blake was there now, demonstrating spinning kicks in front of a mirror. His movements were sharp, but theatrical. A few kids clapped. Blake offered to run today's demonstration, Harris continued. Said it would get media attention. Sponsors, donations. Did it? Keanu asked. Harris chuckled sadly. He got a few likes on his reels, but the sponsors never came. Keanu leaned back in the chair, thoughtful. He wants attention. But Maya just wants to belong. Mr. Harris nodded. And that's the part I can't let disappear. Keanu stood and walked back to the mat. Maya was mid-punch, focused, her movements crisp. She looked over, saw him watching, and lit up. He knelt beside her and said, "You're a warrior. You know that?" She blushed. "You really think so?" He nodded. "And warriors don't give up, right?" "Never," she said, grinning. Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "If you believe in giving every child a chance to shine," he said softly, "hit that subscribe button and share this story." Then he stood, watching her go back to her drills, knowing in his heart that this place, faded mats, broken mirrors, and all was more sacred than any film set he'd ever walked on. Later that afternoon, Keanu stayed to watch the last round of the kids' sparring. Maya was paired with a taller boy, older by at least 2 years, but she held her own, every movement precise, every step rooted in what she'd been taught. She lost the match by points, but walked off the mat smiling. Keanu clapped first. Others followed. When the kids left for the day, Keanu offered to help stack pads. Mr. Harris waved it off with a chuckle. "You don't have to do that. I want to," Keanu said. "Feels like home in here." The two men talked for another hour. Harris told him about other students, single moms, working 2 jobs to afford tuition. Boys on probation who stayed out of trouble because of their early morning katas. One girl, only 13, now trained in national competitions thanks to a scholarship the dojo scraped together. "This place keeps kids off the street," Harris said. "But it also teaches them something their world doesn't always show: self-respect. Not the kind you scream about. The kind that shows up in how you walk, how you treat people." Keanu nodded slowly. "It's the quiet kind, the kind that lasts." Before he left, Keanu walked into the main training room one last time. Blake was still there, finishing a solo routine. When he noticed Keanu, he straightened up and offered a smirk. "You thinking of doing a cameo tomorrow?" Blake asked, clearly amused. "Something like that," Keanu replied, calm. Blake tossed him a foam sword from a basket in the corner. "Might be fun to give the kids a little show. You can teach me some of those John Wick moves." Keanu caught the sword without flinching, eyes locked on Blake's. "I didn't come to perform," he said simply. Blake blinked, then let out a short laugh. "Right." He walked off without waiting for an answer. Keanu stayed in the room for a moment longer, looking around at the empty mats, the worn-out gear, the bulletin board pinned with drawings and old flyers. There was a quiet beauty to it all, one built not from perfection, but from perseverance, from community. He set the foam sword down gently, and then he turned to leave. As he stepped out into the fading light, Maya came running from the side of the building. "Mr. Reeves," he turned, smiling. "Will you be there tomorrow?" she asked. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. She beamed, then ran back inside. And Keanu stood there for a moment longer, hand still in his pocket, fingers touching the folded letter she had written in crayon. A promise had brought him here, but something deeper was going to keep him in it. This wasn't just a visit. It was the beginning of something he hadn't expected. The gymnasium echoed with energy. The bleachers were full, buzzing with conversations and shifting bodies. Parents chatted over coffee cups. Children squirmed in their uniforms, belts tied too tight or too loose. On the far wall, a makeshift banner read, "Annual Community Martial Arts Showcase. Honor, strength, respect." Under the bright lights, Blake took the mat like it was a stage. Dressed in his custom white gi with gold trim, he moved with exaggerated confidence. His chest was puffed out, his smirk sharpened, his timing practiced to the second. He knew how to hold a crowd. And he knew exactly who was watching. He opened his segment with a series of jump kicks, spinning crescent kicks, backflips that landed neatly in the center of the mat. The crowd clapped, not because they understood martial arts, but because it looked impressive. Each move was followed by a wink or a nod toward the bleachers. When one mother stood to take a photo, Blake made sure to give her a smile mid-spin. Children clapped along to the beat of the music blasting from the speakers. Then came the board-breaking display. 2 volunteers held thin wooden boards. Blake stepped back, ran forward, and snapped them both with a loud yell and a flashy tornado kick. The crowd erupted into cheers. Behind the excitement, Keanu stood by the side of the gym, unnoticed by many. He wore the same black t-shirt and jeans from earlier no stage costume, no belt, no entrance. He clapped softly, hands low, observing the moment with quiet detachment. Blake raised his hands, basking in the applause. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he grabbed the mic. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," he said, breathing heavily for effect. "I hope you enjoyed the first half of our show." The crowd responded with polite applause. "But now," Blake continued, grinning wide, "we've got a very special surprise for you. You've seen him in The Matrix, in John Wick, and now, in our humble little dojo. Please, give a warm welcome to the one and only Mr. Keanu Reeves." Gasps rippled through the bleachers, heads turned, phones shot up. A wave of murmurs spread like wildfire. Keanu stepped forward slowly. Blake gestured toward the mat like a ringmaster welcoming the lion. "I thought it'd be fun," Blake said, still holding the mic, "if Mr. Reeves showed us some of his famous movie moves. You know, choreographed kicks, maybe a slow-motion spin. What do you say, folks?" Laughter. A few claps. Someone near the back said, "This'll be good." Keanu stood silently on the edge of the mat. He looked at the faces in the crowd, some amused, some curious, many recording. He glanced at the kids sitting cross-legged on the floor, Maya among them, her eyes wide, hopeful. He bowed, not to Blake, but to the audience. The bow caught a few people off guard. It was quiet, sincere, and completely out of sync with the showy mood Blake had set. Some people clapped again, awkwardly this time, unsure what they were supposed to do. Others whispered to each other. Blake handed Keanu a foam sword, still grinning. "Let's see what you've got, Hollywood." Keanu accepted the weapon gently. His fingers curled around the soft grip with care, not for show, but for respect. He didn't raise it, he didn't posture, he simply nodded. Blake backed up, bouncing on the balls of his feet, swinging his own sword theatrically. He gave the crowd a wink. "You ready?" he asked. Keanu gave a single nod. Blake charged, throwing in a spinning strike that sliced through the air dramatically but missed by a wide margin. Keanu didn't move. He simply shifted his stance, feet rooted. The foam blade passed in front of him like a gust of wind. Laughter broke out from a few rows of bleachers. A teenager shouted, "Come on, Keanu, dodge like in the movie." Blake laughed too. "Guess I'm too fast for you." Keanu tilted his head slightly, then stepped forward, not in aggression, but in fluid readiness. The crowd waited for something big. Some held their phones higher, hoping to capture the moment he embarrassed himself. They didn't know what they were watching. They didn't know what he was doing, but Maya did. Sitting with the younger students, she leaned forward, eyes unblinking. Her fists were clenched around her knees, and her jaw was tight with focus. She recognized the posture, the calm, the stillness. It was how Mr. Harris stood when he demonstrated something real. Blake lunged again. Another wide, swinging arc that would have looked amazing in slow motion on a movie set. Keanu took one step to the side. That was all. The strike missed entirely. Blake stumbled slightly, catching his balance. More laughter. Blake straightened up, chuckling. "He's good at dodging, just like in those fight scenes." The joke landed. The crowd chuckled. One dad turned to his son and said, "He's playing it safe. Doesn't want to mess up his face." Keanu's expression didn't change. His eyes didn't blink. But inside, he felt the moment tighten. The room wasn't laughing with him. They were laughing at him. And still, he said nothing. He bowed again, this time to Blake. Blake narrowed his eyes. His smile twitched. Something about Keanu's calm made him uneasy. He was the one performing, but somehow, Keanu was the one commanding the space. And the crowd didn't realize yet they were about to see something they weren't ready for. Blake paced slowly, circling Keanu, sword raised again. He played to the crowd now, exaggerating every step, drawing out the moment. The kids laughed. Some adults leaned in, waiting for the punchline. He lunged again, but this time, Keanu moved differently. One smooth pivot, one silent redirection. No flash, no noise. Blake's foam blade missed again, but it wasn't just a miss. It looked like he had been gently guided off course by Keanu's body position alone. The crowd murmured. Phones recorded. The laughter softened. Blake grunted and took a step back. Keanu stood upright, relaxed, still holding the sword at his side, never raised. Blake grinned again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "All right," he said. "My turn to play defense." He tapped the floor with the edge of his sword and motioned for Keanu to attack. "Come on, show us something." Keanu didn't move right away. Then, he took a single step forward. He raised his sword, not to strike, but to guide. A slow movement, testing distance. A beginner wouldn't have noticed the precision, but Maya did. And so did Mr. Harris from the far end of the gym. Both sat up straighter. Keanu made one move, a cut across Blake's midline, gentle, controlled, and perfectly placed. Blake jerked his sword up to block, but too late. The foam tapped lightly against his belt before he could react. Some in the audience laughed again, thinking it was part of the act, but Blake blinked hard. He hadn't seen it coming. He reset. Keanu stepped back and bowed once more. Blake frowned. Lucky shot. Keanu said nothing. Maya leaned toward another girl beside her and whispered, "That wasn't luck. That was timing." On the mat, Blake's smile was starting to fade. He rolled his shoulders, breathing heavier now. He circled again. This time, with less playfulness and more tension in his movements. He came in fast, another flurry. 3 wild swings in quick succession. Keanu sidestepped the first, redirected the second with the softest touch, and didn't even need to avoid the third. Blake had overextended himself, landing with one foot awkwardly turned. He was exposed, off balance. For a split second, vulnerable. Keanu didn't strike. He simply lowered his weapon, stepped to the side, and let Blake recover. The gym fell into a strange quiet. Even the kids noticed it now. Keanu's silence wasn't passive. It was deliberate, controlled. Every movement, every decision, every pause. It wasn't indecision. It was intention. Blake looked at him, chest heaving, confused. The crowd, still unsure, started whispering instead of laughing. This wasn't a show anymore. And though Keanu hadn't thrown a single flashy kick or shouted once, something had shifted. Everyone could feel it, especially Blake. And somewhere deep in that moment, Keanu sensed it too. The setup had failed, but he wasn't here to humiliate anyone. He was here for something much bigger. For the kids, for Maya, and for the quiet kind of strength that didn't need to shout. As Blake circled him with jittery movements, Keanu remained still. On the surface, it looked like silence, but inside, something stirred. A memory, a rhythm older than this moment. His breathing slowed. He heard the echo of another room. Years ago, a quiet dojo in a Kyoto suburb, its wooden floor smooth from generations of bare feet. The sun filtered through rice paper walls. The scent of tatami and incense filled the air. He had come to train for the Matrix, thinking it was about the choreography. What he found instead was something entirely different. Keanu stood across from an elderly sensei named Mori. The man didn't speak English fluently, and Keanu didn't speak Japanese, but they understood each other in the space between movement and breath. On that first day, Keanu had bowed too low, nervous and eager. He had tried to impress with speed and enthusiasm, but Sensei Mori had simply raised a hand, then gently tapped him between the shoulder blades. "Empty," the old man said. Keanu had frowned. "Empty," Mori nodded. Too much thinking, no listening. The next hour wasn't spent kicking or punching. It was spent walking across the mat, forward, back, again, and again, and again. Keanu's frustration rose. He was used to long days, long shoots, but this felt like nothing. But then Mori said, "You want movement to matter. First, you must be still." That night, Keanu sat in his small hotel room and replayed the phrase in his mind like a mantra. For the next 3 weeks, he showed up every morning at dawn. No press, no cameras, just bruises, silence, repetition. He learned to fall over and over. One movement drilled 100 times. His elbows ached, his hips bruised. He limped back to the hotel some days, but he kept coming. The kicks, the flips, the rolls, they came later. The foundation was always stillness. Mori never praised, he only observed. One day, after Keanu had executed a perfect pivot without thinking, Mori simply placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now, you listen." It wasn't about looking strong, it was about being present. Back in the gym, Keanu exhaled softly as Blake stepped too close again. His body adjusted without thought. His feet shifted, his balance reset. The sword didn't need to move. Everything he had learned started in those early mornings, barefoot on the wooden floor, the cold biting his skin, breath fogging the air, no one watching, no one clapping, only the sound of feet and the quiet correction of a teacher who saw past ego. That training was never meant for performance. It was meant for life. Years later, when John Wick came into his life, Keanu didn't just return to the movements, he returned to the discipline. He trained 6 days a week, not just in stunt choreography, but in actual judo and aikido, working alongside real black belts who didn't care who he was. His instructor in Los Angeles, a former Olympic coach, told him bluntly, "In here, no one's famous. Everyone's a beginner again." Keanu embraced it. He started over, again. The gym mats were stained, the walls plain, the locker room dim, but it felt like home. He took every fall, rolled through every throw. Sometimes, his shoulders burned so badly, he had to soak in ice for an hour before driving home. His knees swelled, his wrists popped, but he kept coming back. The mats taught him humility, not just because they hurt, but because they never lied. He remembered one night when he got thrown hard by a younger student half his size, less than half his age. The kid apologized, horrified, thinking he disrespected the actor. Keanu just smiled from the ground and said, "You did it right." That moment stuck with him, because real martial arts wasn't about domination. It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about awareness, discipline, and kindness. The kind of power that didn't need to prove itself. That understanding deepened when his sister Kim got sick again. He had just wrapped a film in New York and flown back to LA when the news came her leukemia had returned. In the weeks that followed, he barely slept. Hospital visits, late-night drives, tests, uncertainty. Through it all, he trained, not because he needed to stay fit, but because the mat was the only place he could breathe. He remembered the first day he came back to the dojo after hearing Kim's prognosis. He walked in late, said nothing. The class paused. His coach looked at him and nodded toward the mat. "Fall," he said. Keanu did. Again and again. With each roll, each break fall, each movement, something opened inside him. The grief didn't disappear, but it had a place to go. It didn't weigh on his shoulders. It flowed through his body and hit the mat. Later that night, he sat alone in the changing room, towel over his head, still catching his breath. The coach came in and placed a hand on his back. "You fight for her, the way you train here," the man said, quiet, but never giving in. That was the moment martial arts became more than training. It became medicine. It became memory. It became prayer. And standing now in front of a laughing crowd, foam sword in hand, Keanu wasn't thinking about showing off. He was thinking about everything he had learned in silence. And everything he had survived because of it. Keanu's eyes drifted again across the gymnasium, catching a brief flash of movement from the kids. Seated along the floor, Maya leaned slightly forward, chin on her knees, not blinking. She wasn't there for entertainment. She was watching like it mattered, and it did. Because Maya, like Kim, like so many others he had quietly carried with him, deserved a world where strength looked different. Not louder, not flashier, just deeper. His mind pulled him back again, this time to one of his final days training in Japan. It was the end of his stay. He had arrived early to the dojo, hoping for one last quiet session before flying home. But Sensei Mori was already there, kneeling alone on the mat. Keanu approached and bowed. The old man didn't speak for a while. Then he gestured for Keanu to sit beside him. "You have learned to move," Mori said softly. "But more importantly, you have learned to stop moving." Keanu furrowed his brow, unsure. Mori tapped his own chest gently. Real mastery is silent. They sat there together in stillness, breath in sync, the wooden floor cool beneath their knees. No camera, no audience, just presence. And that phrase, real mastery is silent, had echoed in Keanu's life ever since. Through success, through grief, through every role, every moment of self-doubt, every private battle. Now, in this gym, surrounded by strangers, facing a man desperate to prove something, Keanu drew once more from that silence. Not to win, not to fight, but to anchor. Because the world didn't need more noise, it needed more depth. And the children watching this scene unfold, especially Maya, deserved to see what quiet strength really looked like. Blake moved again on the edge of his vision, circling back into position. His breathing was louder now, movements more erratic. The crowd had stopped laughing. The energy had shifted. The tension that once belonged to the joke had turned inward. Keanu's stance remained soft, responsive, present. And though no one could hear the words, they lived inside his posture. Real mastery is silent. He could almost hear his sensei's voice whispering again, somewhere behind the noise, behind the years, behind the sword still resting low in his grip. Not every fight is meant to be won. Some are meant to be witnessed. Some are meant to be remembered. As the next move loomed, and Blake squared his shoulders for another round, Keanu didn't tighten up. He breathed. He listened. And he stood not as a movie star, not as a fighter, but as a student who had never stopped learning. Because strength wasn't in the strike. It was in the restraint. And in that restraint, in that stillness, Keanu carried the entire weight of what had shaped him. Not to strike back, but to stand. For her, for Maya, for Kim, for every person who had ever needed to know that real strength doesn't scream, it simply stays. Blake bounced slightly on the balls of his feet, circling back into the center of the mat. His breathing had quickened, though he tried to hide it beneath the same smirk he'd worn at the beginning. A few beads of sweat clung to his temple. He twirled his foam sword again, less smoothly this time. Then, with theatrical flair, he tossed another practice weapon toward Keanu. It landed at his feet with a soft thud. "Let's see what Hollywood has taught you," Blake said, his tone louder than before. The mic was off now, but the gym's acoustics carried his voice clearly across the bleachers. There were fewer laughs this time, more shifting, more silence. Keanu bent down slowly, picked up the foam sword, and held it in his left hand. His right hand brushed the back of his wrist, a subtle movement to recenter his balance. He didn't respond with words. Blake took a dramatic stance, blade pointed outward like a warrior from a video game. He glanced around, trying to stir some energy from the crowd. "Don't blink, folks. This could be straight out of the Matrix." A few half-hearted chuckles. A couple of parents raised their phones again, but the tone had shifted. The laughter wasn't quite laughter anymore, it was anticipation. Blake lunged. Not a real strike, just a flourish. A sweeping diagonal slash aimed to skim the edge of Keanu's shirt. The kind of movement designed to elicit gasps and impress a crowd. But Keanu wasn't there. He didn't block. He didn't flinch. He simply stepped. One movement. No wind-up. No panic. Just precision. Blake's strike sliced the air where Keanu had been standing half a second before. There was a pause. Blake turned, blinking. Keanu remained still, calm, sword lowered. A few murmurs rose from the audience. Not laughter this time. Something more confused, curious. Blake cleared his throat, forcing a grin. "Nice move," he muttered. Then louder, all right. You've got reflexes. Let's step it up." He feinted again, faster this time. A side sweep with more force behind it. Keanu pivoted. His movement had no flash, no resistance. He didn't even raise his weapon. He simply avoided the blade, like it was a breeze. Now the audience was watching differently. The crowd had leaned in. Keanu's feet whispered against the mat as he reset his position. He bowed just a slight nod of acknowledgement. Then he spoke for the first time since stepping onto the mat. "Would it be all right," he said, "if I showed something else?" Blake blinked. "What? Like a breathing exercise?" The sarcasm cut through the air. Keanu didn't react. "Something quieter," he said. Blake laughed. "Sure, why not? Teach away, Hollywood." But his grin was thinner now. He agreed, because in his mind, this was his chance to take the stage back, and maybe, just maybe, finally put Keanu Reeves in his place. Keanu stepped forward slowly, placing the foam sword gently on the edge of the mat. He no longer needed it. His hands were open, movements minimal. There was no performance in his stance, no theatricality, just readiness, stillness. He turned to the audience and gestured toward the students seated in front. "May I borrow a volunteer?" he asked. A hush fell over the crowd. One of the older students, a boy around 12, glanced toward Mr. Harris. The instructor nodded. The boy stood, adjusted his belt, and approached Keanu with reverent caution. Keanu bowed to him. The boy bowed back. "Just follow my movements," Keanu said gently. They faced each other in the center of the mat. Keanu raised his hands, not in fists, but palms open, inviting. The boy mirrored him. Then, slowly, Keanu shifted his stance. 1 foot forward, weight evenly distributed, arms calm. He extended his hand forward gently. The boy reached to push it, unsure. With a subtle shift, Keanu redirected the movement, guiding the boy's energy past him. He didn't resist. He didn't block. He accepted the momentum and guided it elsewhere. The boy stumbled slightly, not from force, but from balance being borrowed. The crowd watched in silence. Keanu smiled and stepped back. Again. This time the boy pushed with more confidence. Keanu moved like water pivoting, rolling his shoulder, gently guiding the boy's arm across his body and letting him pass. No strike, no fall, just pure, clean redirection. Maya sat forward on her knees, eyes locked on every move. Blake stood near the edge, arms crossed now, lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't what he had planned. This wasn't a fight. It was something else, something harder to control. Keanu demonstrated again, this time letting the boy push harder. As the energy came in, Keanu stepped into it, dropped his center of gravity, and softly brought the boy to the mat, using nothing but balance and redirection. The landing was gentle. The boy blinked up at him, surprised. Keanu extended a hand and helped him up. The boy smiled. The crowd began to clap, not wildly, not like before, but slowly, genuinely. Keanu turned toward them and bowed. Then he looked at Blake. "Would you like to try?" Blake hesitated. He hadn't expected this. He wanted spectacle. He wanted choreography. Not this. But with eyes on him again, and pride in his throat. He nodded. He stepped forward. Keanu bowed. Blake did too, but his bow was short. His eyes locked on Keanu's hands. He thought he saw an opening. He was wrong. And this time, the lesson wouldn't come from flash. It would come from what he didn't see coming. Blake took his stance, trying to mirror what Keanu had just demonstrated. But it wasn't the same. His legs were too wide, his arms too stiff. He held tension in his shoulders, in his jaw, even in his breath. Where Keanu had flowed, Blake braced. Keanu noticed it immediately. Still, he offered Blake the same opportunity. "Push when you're ready," he said softly. Blake didn't wait. He stepped in with a forceful shove, intending to break Keanu's center. But the second his palm made contact, Keanu's body rotated gently, letting the energy pass through like wind around a tree. Blake stumbled a step forward, off balance. Keanu's hands remained open, unthreatening. There was a flicker of laughter from a few of the students. Blake's face tightened. He came again, this time with a more aggressive push, no longer trying to cooperate, but to dominate. He thought he could catch Keanu off guard. He never got the chance. Keanu stepped into the force, dropped his center, and with one precise movement, redirected Blake's pressure into a circular motion. The momentum turned against Blake, and before he could recover, Keanu guided him gently but firmly to the mat. It wasn't a throw. It wasn't violent. It was graceful, effortless. Blake lay there, stunned, not hurt, just exposed. Keanu immediately extended his hand to help him up. The audience watched in total silence. Blake hesitated, looking up at the hand that offered him dignity instead of humiliation. He took it. Keanu pulled him gently to his feet. The two men stood facing each other. Keanu bowed once again, full, respectful. Blake didn't bow back. He stood there, swallowing hard, eyes scanning the room. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't laugh. They just watched. Something had changed. The parents in the bleachers no longer looked for flash. The kids on the mat weren't mimicking kicks or punches. They were wide-eyed, still, absorbing something different. Even Maya sat frozen, lips parted slightly, hands resting quietly in her lap. Keanu turned and addressed the crowd. "In martial arts," he said, "we're taught to meet force with balance. Power doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be fast. It has to be true. No mic, no spotlight, just his voice. Clear, measured. You don't always win by hitting harder. Sometimes you win by not needing to hit at all." There was a pause. Then came the applause. This time, it wasn't for Blake's kicks or Keanu's fame. It was for the truth. The kids clapped first, then the parents, then the room. Blake stepped back toward the edge of the mat, face unreadable. Keanu didn't follow. He returned to Maya and the students and knelt beside them, sword still resting where he'd left it. Because the lesson was never about the sword. It was about control. It was about presence. And whether Blake understood it or not, Keanu had just taught the most important form in martial arts, the one that doesn't need to strike to leave a mark. Keanu stood at the center of the mat, now alone, the foam sword left behind. His hands rested calmly at his sides. The atmosphere had changed. The crowd wasn't buzzing anymore. They were leaning in, trying to understand what exactly they were seeing. He turned slowly toward the seated students and scanned the group. "Would someone like to join me?" he asked, his voice warm and low. A few of the younger students looked at one another. Then a hand went up. It belonged to a tall, broad-shouldered teenage boy, 14, maybe 15. He stood with hesitation at first, but when Keanu nodded with a quiet smile, the boy walked forward. "What's your name?" Keanu asked. "Darius," the boy said, his voice cracking slightly. Keanu bowed. "Thank you, Darius." Darius bowed back, doing his best to stay composed in front of the crowd. Keanu placed one foot forward and motioned gently for Darius to push against his chest. "Don't worry about hurting me," he said with a smile. "Just give me some pressure." Darius nodded and stepped forward, placing both palms on Keanu's chest and pushing with measured strength. Keanu didn't push back. Instead, he turned his body with the movement. One foot rotated. One hand brushed against Darius's wrist. The other guided his shoulder. The redirection was effortless. Darius stumbled forward, not from imbalance, but because the energy he gave had nowhere to go except through the space Keanu opened. Keanu caught him before he fully lost his footing. A few gasps fluttered through the crowd. No one expected it to be that smooth. Keanu smiled and reset. "Again?" Darius grinned. "Yes, sir." This time, the teen pushed harder. And again, Keanu didn't resist. He moved with the pressure, not against it. A slight turn of the hip, a lowering of his center of gravity, a soft guiding touch, and Darius found himself gently brought to the mat. Not slammed, not flipped, just placed. Like water rolling downhill, the room went still. Keanu knelt beside the boy and helped him up. "That," he said calmly, "is what we call no resistance." He turned to the audience. Martial arts isn't always about meeting force with more force. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is step aside and guide it. A murmur passed through the crowd. Heads nodded. Parents leaned toward their children. On the edge of the student line, Maya beamed. Her eyes sparkled with quiet understanding. She had seen Mr. Harris teach it before, but never like this. This wasn't performance. It was presence. Keanu stood again, facing Darius. "Let's show them one more time," he said. And the boy nodded, eager, not to win, but to learn. At the edge of the mat, Blake's arms were crossed tightly, his jaw clenched. Because with every quiet move Keanu made, the spotlight slipped further away from him, and he knew it. Keanu and Darius reset in the center of the mat. This time, Keanu invited the teen to try something new. "Now, I want you to grab my wrist," Keanu said. "Hold tight, like you don't want me to move." Darius obeyed, wrapping his hand around Keanu's wrist and clamping down with determination. The crowd watched, unsure of what to expect. Keanu didn't yank or jerk. He didn't force his way out. Instead, he moved with the grip, a subtle shift of his arm, a circular motion of the wrist, and a small rotation of his shoulder. His entire body flowed like a river bending around a rock. Suddenly, Darius's grip unraveled, not because it was weak, but because it no longer had tension to pull against. Keanu had dissolved it, like steam rising from warm pavement. Somewhere in the bleachers, a man whispered, "Did you see that?" Another replied, "That wasn't muscle, that was control." Keanu turned to the audience. "You don't have to overpower someone to take control," he said gently. "You just have to understand where their energy is going and let it go there without resisting it." He looked back at Darius. "You want to try it on me?" Darius's eyes widened. "Me?" Keanu nodded. "Of course. You'll be surprised how natural it can feel." He offered his arm. Darius reached out, hesitant. Keanu guided him through the movement, step by step, hip rotation, wrist alignment, foot placement. Then, without effort, Keanu allowed his body to go with the motion, and he lowered himself to the mat under Darius's control. The boy froze, realizing what had just happened. The crowd clapped this time with warmth, not for Keanu, but for Darius. And that's exactly how Keanu wanted it. He sat up, smiled at the teen, and patted him on the shoulder. "Well done," he said. The audience had shifted completely. Parents looked at their kids, inspired. Students sat straighter. Even some of the more skeptical adults began nodding along with what they were seeing. Keanu stood and helped Darius bow to the crowd. Then he turned back to the students. "You don't have to be the strongest," he said. "You don't have to be the fastest. You just have to be present, aware, and willing to learn." A soft wave of applause followed, rippling through the bleachers like wind through grass. And in that moment, without showmanship, without raised voices or flashing lights, Keanu had captured the room. Not with power, but with peace. Maya wiped at the corner of her eye. She didn't know why she was crying, only that something about what she saw made her feel like she mattered. that this path, this way of learning was something she could belong to. And from the far edge of the mat, Blake saw it happening. Saw the attention shift, the approval, the respect, and none of it was pointed at him. Blake shifted his stance near the edge of the mat, arms still crossed, fingers tapping anxiously against his biceps. He had worked the crowd with flips, kicks, and explosive moves all morning. But now, all that noise seemed to evaporate under something quieter, something real. Keanu stood beside Darius and turned to the younger students. "Anyone else want to try?" he asked, eyes gentle. Several hands shot up. Maya's was first. She stepped forward with confidence, tying her belt tighter as she approached. Keanu gave her a soft smile. "You ready?" Maya nodded. "I've been ready all week." The crowd chuckled warmly. Her spirit lifted the room. Keanu showed her the same technique he had just practiced with Darius, adjusting it for her smaller frame. She followed every instruction, her movements exact, her mind fully present. When she managed to guide Keanu off balance and gently bring him toward the mat with control, the audience erupted not in wild cheers, but in genuine applause. Parents stood, cameras recorded. The energy had shifted completely. Mr. Harris watched from the sidelines, arms crossed not out of defensiveness, but pride. His eyes glistened. For him, this wasn't just martial arts. This was legacy. Keanu rose slowly, dusted himself off, and placed a hand over his heart toward Maya. She bowed. He bowed lower. Then he turned to the crowd once more. "When I started learning martial arts, I thought it was about looking tough, being fast, hitting hard." He paused. "But what I found was something else. I found balance. I found stillness. I found how to move without fighting, and how to stand without being loud." The words settled in the gym like morning light through a window. Blake looked down at the mat. The moment was no longer his, and he knew it. He turned away, stepping toward the equipment table. His jaw clenched tight, and he picked up a stack of training pads, trying to distract himself, trying not to feel the burn creeping into his chest. Because he hadn't just lost the spotlight, he'd lost the room's respect. Not because Keanu beat him, but because Keanu refused to. Keanu looked toward him briefly. No smirk, no gloating, just a nod of acknowledgement. The kind of gesture that says, "You're still part of this, if you want to be." Blake didn't return it. Not yet. But something in his eyes flickered just a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Keanu turned back to the students, and with quiet authority, he said, "The best martial artist in the room isn't the strongest, it's the one who lifts others up." And as the students gathered closer, eyes bright, spirits lifted, it was clear this wasn't a performance. It was a lesson, and no one watching would forget it. The students were still gathered around Keanu, some sitting cross-legged, others kneeling, their eyes full of curiosity. A sense of calm had spread across the gym, different from the buzz earlier in the day. This was something slower, heavier, but comforting. It felt like they were witnessing something sacred. Keanu stepped back to the center of the mat and addressed the crowd. "We've seen how energy can be redirected," he said gently. "But sometimes you face someone bigger, stronger, someone who doesn't hold back." He turned toward the bleachers. "Would any adult like to join me?" The room paused. A few heads turned. Then a hand went up, hesitant at first, then committed. It belonged to a man in his early 40s. Broad-shouldered, muscular, with calloused hands and skeptical eyes, he stood and walked to the mat, giving a small wave to the audience. Keanu met him halfway and bowed. The man returned it, a little unsure of the formality. "What's your name?" Keanu asked. "Tony," the man replied. "I used to wrestle in college. Haven't trained in years." Keanu smiled. "Perfect." They stood facing each other. "I want you to throw a punch," Keanu said. "Slow at first, nothing flashy. Just let it come naturally." Tony looked a bit uncertain. "You want me to hit you?" "I want you to try," Keanu replied, voice soft. "You'll stop yourself before contact. Just let it flow." Tony nodded. He raised a fist and stepped forward, launching a controlled punch toward Keanu's chest. Keanu's body turned like a reed in water. His left foot slid back. His right hand guided the incoming arm just past his body. He didn't meet force with force. He met it with breath. The motion was quiet. And then, almost without anyone realizing how they were on the ground, Tony lay on his back. Not hurt, just redirected. His momentum had done the work for him. He blinked up at Keanu. Surprised, Keanu knelt and extended a hand. Tony took it, smiling as he stood. "Okay," Tony said. "That was real." The students clapped. A few of the younger kids even stood and cheered. Keanu bowed to Tony again, then turned to the crowd. "Aikido teaches that when someone comes at you with aggression, you don't have to meet them head-on. You meet them where they are. Guide the energy away from harm yours and theirs." He gestured to the mats. "Footwork, breathing, timing. That's what makes it work." Some of the parents nodded, their earlier skepticism fading into genuine curiosity. Maya's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes wide with admiration. Then a voice cut through the calm. "This isn't real martial arts." Everyone turned. Blake stepped forward from the side of the mat, arms loose at his sides, face tense. "This is philosophy, showmanship, not what we trained for." Keanu looked at him, unmoved. Then he bowed. And with complete calm, he said, "Then show me." The room went quiet. Keanu's words weren't a challenge. They weren't loud, but they landed with the weight of a bell ringing through a still canyon. "Then show me." Blake hesitated. Just for a second. Enough to register. Enough for the students to notice. He stepped onto the mat, his feet louder than before, his posture tighter. The air around him was heavy with something sharp, not fear ego. "You want me to punch you now?" Blake asked, a mocking grin on his face. Keanu met his eyes, expression steady. I want you to do what you do best." Blake rolled his shoulders. "All right." He stepped back, cracked his neck, and shook out his arms like he was prepping for a sparring match. The crowd watched with bated breath. Phones raised. Whispers spread. He moved quickly, launching a sudden, clean jab toward Keanu's shoulder. Keanu stepped to the side with fluid precision. Not hurried, not flustered, just enough to avoid contact. His footwork, tight and invisible, brought him back into a slade. Neutral position almost before Blake had retracted the strike. Blake advanced again, this time with a hook, faster. Keanu didn't flinch. He turned with the motion, allowing it to pass him by. One hand brushed Blake's upper arm. The other moved toward his waist-like contact, no force. Blake grunted. "You're not even trying." "I'm not here to fight you," Keanu said. That only fueled Blake's frustration. He lunged again, trying to sweep Keanu's leg. This time he committed too hard. Keanu pivoted. One simple, practiced motion. And suddenly, Blake's momentum betrayed him. With a quiet step and a shift of weight, Keanu guided Blake forward and down, not thrown, not slammed, but lowered by his own force. The moment he hit the mat, Blake let out a breath between his teeth. He wasn't hurt, but he was stunned. Keanu stepped back. Blake sat up slowly, sweat on his brow, his arms propped behind him for support. His mouth opened, but no words came out right away. Keanu extended a hand. For a long moment, Blake didn't take it. Then, slowly, he reached up. Keanu pulled him to his feet and bowed again. The audience didn't cheer this time. They sat in awe, because something deeper had just happened. Tony crossed his arms from the sideline, a slow smile spreading across his face. That, he whispered to no one in particular, was real. The students knew it too. They had seen control without domination. They had seen grace without retreat. And from that moment forward, they would never again confuse aggression with strength or silence with weakness. And neither would Blake. He looked around the gym, chest rising and falling, his pride dented, but something in his face had changed. The crowd no longer looked at him like the star. They were looking at Keanu, But not because he won. Because he didn't need to. Keanu turned back to the students, his voice calm and low, meant for them more than anyone else. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone who shouts louder, he said. Sometimes real strength is doing less, not more. He walked slowly to the edge of the mat, picking up the foam sword he had left earlier. He held it for a moment, then looked to Maya. When I was your age, he said, I thought strength was about looking brave. But real courage is the ability to stay centered when someone tries to shake you. Maya's eyes welled, though she didn't understand why. She just knew he was speaking to her, even if he was facing the crowd. A boy sitting next to her raised his hand. Did you ever get scared? Keanu looked at him, and a soft smile curved at the corner of his lips. All the time, he said, but fear is like a wave. You don't stop it by pretending it's not there. You learn to move through it. A few parents nodded. One mother whispered, That's what my son needed to hear. Behind them, Blake stood awkwardly to the side. The gym lights, once beaming onto his performance, now felt hot and distant. His breathing slowed. His shoulders dropped. He wasn't the center anymore, and for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like a failure. It felt like a relief. Keanu bowed to the crowd. To those of you who came for a show, he said, thank you for staying for something different. Applause rose again, stronger this time. Not wild, but steady, from the heart. Tony, still near the edge of the mat, walked back up and gave Keanu a solid handshake. Whatever you just did out here, he said, you did more than teach them. You reminded me. Keanu nodded. Me too. As the students began lining up to bow out for the day, Keanu remained beside them, just one more figure among a room full of learners. He didn't separate himself. He didn't stand taller. He stood with them. Maya tugged gently at his shirt. Was that Aikido? She asked. Keanu looked down at her. Yes. She grinned. I want to learn that. You already are, he said. Blake watched all of it unfold. His pride still smarted, but something deeper pulled at him, something he couldn't name yet. Mr. Harris finally stepped forward, clapping his hands once. Line up, he said. Time to end with respect. And as Keanu bowed with them, side by side with children half his size and a world apart in experience, he felt something deeper than applause. He felt the room exhale. The performance was over. But the impact had just begun, and every person there would leave remembering one thing. Real power doesn't rise through noise, it arrives through stillness. Blake stood motionless at the edge of the mat, arms limp at his sides, eyes burning a hole through the floor. Applause echoed around him. It wasn't for him. Not anymore. He could feel the shift in every corner of the room. Parents, kids, instructors, they all saw something he had missed, something he had dismissed, and they hadn't needed explosions or backflips to see it. He had been the star, the face of the event, the one with the energy, the youth, the edge. Now they were clapping for stillness, for breath, for humility, and for him, Keanu Reeves. Blake's heart pounded. A wave of heat surged through his chest. His palm stung with the memory of the mat. His pride throbbed louder than his pulse. He stepped forward. Mr. Harris noticed it first. Blake, he said gently, let it go. But Blake didn't respond. Keanu, still standing by the line of students, saw the movement too. His shoulders didn't tense. He simply turned, calm, aware. Blake walked slowly to the center of the mat. No microphone this time, no sword, just a tight jaw and something unresolved behind his eyes. Keanu gave a small bow. Blake didn't return it. He looked around the gym, watching the phones, the whispers, the expressions. He wasn't in control anymore. He hated how that felt. This isn't how it works, Blake said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You can't just stroll in here and hijack the whole thing with philosophy. Keanu didn't flinch. I didn't come to hijack anything. Blake shook his head. Number, but you came to take it, quietly, like you always do. There was silence. Everyone was listening now. You think because you move slow and say things that sound wise, that it makes you better? It doesn't. This is martial arts. It's about discipline, performance, strength. Keanu took a breath. It's also about control, Blake snapped. Let's see it then. Before anyone could stop him, he lunged. No showmanship, no practice swing. Just a fast, angry punch aimed directly at Keanu's chest. Gasps rose from the bleachers. A few parents shouted. Harris stepped forward instinctively, but it was too late. The punch was already in motion. Keanu didn't panic. He didn't recoil. He stepped in. With one smooth movement, he shifted his body slightly to the side, letting the punch pass through air. Then his arm slid around Blake's extended forearm, guiding it forward. His other hand pressed gently against Blake's shoulder. One pivot of the hip, one grounded stance. And Blake's body rotated downward, brought to the mat in a single controlled spiral. No pain, no crash, just silence. He landed on his back, arms spread, staring at the ceiling. Not hurt, just stunned. The entire gym froze. No one moved, no one spoke. The sound of Blake's breath was the only thing that filled the air. Keanu stood over him, not victorious, just present. Then, slowly, he knelt, reached out his hand. The silence held. Keanu didn't speak. He simply extended his hand and waited. Blake stared at it for a long moment, chest rising and falling, lips pressed in a hard line. He wanted to swat it away, wanted to roll over and stand up on his own, wanted to prove that he didn't need help. Not from this man, not from anyone, but something cracked inside. Him something quieter than pride, older than frustration. It was shame, and it was exhaustion. He took the hand. Keanu helped him to his feet with the same gentleness he had shown the children. There was no smirk, no hidden satisfaction, just respect, mutual, unwavering. Blake stood still, staring at the floor, his arms limp. Blake bowed back, stiff, short, but this time it was real. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The tension that had held the gym in suspense now softened. A collective breath released. The conflict was over, but something else had taken its place. A sense of reflection, of perspective. Keanu turned to the audience. "I want to say something," he said, his voice carrying across the gym. "To all the students here today, when someone challenges you, you don't always need to fight back. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is listen. And sometimes, the person challenging you is hurting." A beat passed. No one moved. Keanu continued. "When I started training, I thought martial arts was about power, speed, dominance. But my teachers showed me something else. They taught me how to fall, how to breathe, how to stand still when everything inside you wants to explode." He looked down for a moment, remembering. "They taught me that you don't master martial arts to defeat people. You master it to master yourself." Blake's eyes lowered. He didn't argue. Not anymore. From the side of the mat, Mr. Harris stepped forward. He looked between the two men, then addressed the room. "Sometimes, a fight teaches more than 1,000 words ever could," he said. "What you saw today wasn't a match. It was a mirror." Tony nodded in the crowd. A few parents clapped softly. Others simply sat with full hearts and damp eyes. Keanu stepped back toward the students. Blake remained in the center, unsure of what to do next. He wasn't used to losing control without falling apart. But this time, something was different. Keanu glanced over his shoulder and gave Blake a small nod. An invitation, not a lecture. Blake lowered his head and stepped off the mat. Not in defeat, but in acceptance. Maya whispered to the girl next to her. He didn't hurt him, he helped him. And in that single sentence, everything was said. Because the greatest impact didn't come from the throw, or the silence, or even the bow. It came from the hand extended, the choice not to humiliate, the decision to lift up, even when you have every reason to look down. And in that moment, real power was no longer a performance. It was a gift, given freely, and received with quiet grace. After the demonstration ended, and the crowd had begun to disperse, Keanu sat quietly in the corner of the gym near the exit door, tying his sneakers. The buzz of conversation, the laughter of children, the slow hum of parents gathering belongings, all of it faded behind his thoughts. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hair loose around his shoulders, and a small towel rested in his lap. He looked calm, but inside, something older stirred. That moment with Blake when the punch came could have gone so differently. Years ago, it would have. He remembered it clearly. A press event for a film early in his career, before Speed, before The Matrix. It was a small movie, an indie production that meant the world to him. He had poured himself into it. But during the junket, one of the hosts on a live show smirking for the cameras called him wooden, mocked his voice, and laughed about his martial arts scenes, saying he looked like a slow waiter trying to dance. The comment wasn't clever, it wasn't even funny, but it landed, and it hit Keanu harder than it should have. He laughed it off in the moment, nodded politely. But later that night, at a rap party, the same host showed up, drunk, loud, and eager to impress his friends. Keanu had just finished speaking to a group of fans when he passed by the host near the bar. The man said something again louder, this time, slurred but cruel. "You're not a fighter, Keanu. You just pretend to be one." The crowd laughed, and something inside Keanu snapped. He didn't throw a punch, but he turned around sharply, walked back, and said something he regretted the moment it left his mouth. Something mean. Not cruel, not profane, but sharp enough to wound. The host turned red. The laughter stopped. People stared. It wasn't violence, but it wasn't grace either. And afterward, Keanu felt hollow, not proud, not strong, just empty. The next day, he sat in silence during a flight to Tokyo, where he was scheduled to resume martial arts training for an upcoming project. His mind replayed the moment over and over. He thought about how easy it had been to respond, how fast the anger had risen, how cold it felt to win with words. His mentor, Sensei Mori, met him at the dojo with quiet eyes. He hadn't seen the incident, hadn't heard the story, but somehow knew something was unsettled. After class, as Keanu sat on the worn wooden bench wiping sweat from his brow, Mori sat beside him. "Your breath is short," the old man said in Japanese. "Your heart is heavy." Keanu nodded. "I got angry." Mori looked at him for a long time, then said, "When the ego is gone, the warrior is born." Keanu didn't respond at first. Mori continued, "The art is not about winning. It is about not needing to." That was the moment Keanu made a vow, not just to fight differently, but to live differently. From that moment forward, Keanu trained not for roles, but for understanding. Not to look powerful on screen, but to feel peace off it. He threw himself into every fall, every roll, every correction. He memorized the subtleties, the breath before the movement, the stillness before the strike, the bow that said more than 1,000 words. He learned how to listen with his body. Mori never spoke in long lectures. He would simply correct a stance, pause after a mistake, and then ask one question: "Who are you?" without your need to prove. It took Keanu years to answer that, because the need to prove hides itself well. It lives inside compliments, inside applause, inside moments where silence feels like weakness. It pretends to be strength, even as it erodes it from within. There was another moment, years later, that cemented the vow. He had been offered a film that required him to train with weapons specialists for 6 months. The director wanted brutal realism, raw speed, a dominant presence. Keanu trained hard, hours a day. But when it came time to film one particular scene, a close-quarters combat sequence, he asked the director to shoot it differently. "Make the character retreat," Keanu said. Make him yield, not because he's scared, but because he understands when not to escalate. The director pushed back, said it wasn't cinematic, but Keanu insisted. And when the movie came out, that moment, the moment his character stepped back rather than fight, was the one that audiences remembered. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Back in the gym, Keanu finished tying his laces and looked around. The mats were nearly empty now. A few parents still talked softly in the back. Mr. Harris was sweeping near the front door. Blake had already left without saying a word. But the students were still there. Not physically, but in his mind. Especially Maya. She reminded him of Kim. Not in appearance, but in heart. In her stubbornness. In the way she clenched her fists when she was scared, pretending it was confidence. Kim had done the same thing when she was 12. When the doctors first said the word leukemia, he had trained harder that year than ever before not to escape, but to endure. The mat had become his refuge. The quiet space between steps, between strikes, between breaths. That's where he found the strength to show up at the hospital every day with a smile, even when he was dying inside. That's why he didn't fight back today. That's why he didn't humiliate Blake when he had the chance. Because there's always something beneath a punch. Sometimes it's ego, sometimes it's fear, and sometimes it's grief. But whatever it is, it doesn't need to be answered with violence. It needs to be met with clarity, with stillness, with choice. And that was the vow he'd kept all these years later, to never strike for pride, to never rise for applause, only to stand quietly when it matters. The gym had mostly quieted down. The main demonstrations were over, and the crowd was beginning to gather their things, conversations picking up again. But Maya hadn't moved. She stood just outside the edge of the mat, eyes locked on Keanu as he sat near the far wall lacing his shoes. She hadn't blinked through his demonstration with Blake. Her heart had raced the whole time, not from fear, but because she knew. She knew what Keanu was doing. She understood why he moved the way he did. It wasn't just technique. It was kindness. It was strength. And it was hers, too. She took a deep breath, then ran. Her shoes slapped the floor in quick steps as she crossed the gym. Several heads turned as they saw her sprinting toward him, her ponytail bouncing. She stopped just short of where he sat and dropped to her knees on the mat in front of him. "Mr. Reeves," she said, out of breath, face flushed. Keanu looked up, surprised, and smiled. "Hi, Maya. I just wanted to say thank you." He gave a small nod. "For what?" She hesitated. Then her voice cracked. "For everything you just did. For how you did it." Keanu set his shoes aside and gave her his full attention. "I was gonna quit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I almost told Mr. Harris last week that I didn't want to come anymore." He tilted his head gently, concerned. "Why?" "Because," she blinked fast, "because there are boys who say, I don't belong here, that I'm not strong enough, that I only train because people feel sorry for me since my dad died." The words hung there like cold air. Keanu didn't interrupt. He let the silence hold her courage. "I tried to ignore it," she continued, "but I heard them after class one day, laughing. I cried in the bathroom. I didn't want to tell anyone, not even my mom." She looked down at her belt, fingers fidgeting with the knot. "But then you came, and you didn't yell, you didn't punch anybody, you didn't even try to win, and everyone saw what real strength looks like." Her eyes met his, again, shining now, but not from pain, from clarity. "You showed them." Across the gym, the conversations faded. People noticed. One by one, parents paused their small talk. Mr. Harris set down the broom. Even Tony walked in from the hallway to listen. "You showed me," Maya whispered. Keanu reached out and rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because you train hard, not even because you spoke up." She waited, eyes wide. "I'm proud of you because you stayed,
Even when it was hard, even when it hurt, you stayed." A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. In the back, someone started clapping. It was slow, gentle. Then it spread. Parents, students, even the kids who had laughed earlier. And none of it was for a performance. It was for a child who had found her strength again. Mr.
Harris stepped forward from the sidelines, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked at Maya, then at Keanu, and smiled the kind of smile that held years of pride behind it. He placed a hand on Maya's back and gave her a nod. "I've seen her train in pain," he said softly to the nearby parents. "I've seen her come to class even when the world told her not to bother. That's a fighter." The clapping grew louder, not thunderous, but deeper, more meaningful. A few donors who had shown up only for PR purposes were now standing near the back, some with their arms crossed, some wiping the corners of their eyes. One of them, a woman in a gray blazer with a clipboard, turned to the others and whispered, "This school deserves more support than we've given." Another man nodded, his voice low. "This isn't just a program, it's a place where kids find out who they are." At the front of the room, Keanu stood with Maya at his side. She still held his hand. Not out of fear, but out of connection. Her strength wasn't in hiding her tears anymore. It was in standing, with them visible, knowing they didn't, to make her weak. Keanu looked down at her, then gently let go and motioned toward the mat. "Would you do something for me?" he asked. Maya nodded. "Show them what staying looks like." Without a word, she stepped back onto the center mat, took a deep breath, and bowed to the room. The crowd quieted instantly. She turned, assumed her stance, and began a slow, deliberate kata. Each movement was clean, balanced, grounded. There was no flash, no music, no dramatic lights, just breath and control, and something deeper that every eye in the gym could feel. When she finished, she held her final position for a full 3 seconds. Then, she bowed again. The applause that followed was different than before. It wasn't just respect. It was recognition. Recognition of spirit, of perseverance, of real strength. Keanu walked to her side and stood silently beside her as the audience continued clapping. He didn't wave. He didn't smile wide for the cameras. He simply stood, honoring the moment. Blake, still near the doorway, had been watching the whole thing. His arms were crossed, not defensively, but thoughtfully. He hadn't expected this. None of it. And for the first time since the day began, he didn't feel like performing. He felt like learning. As the clapping faded, Keanu knelt again beside Maya. "You're stronger than you know," he said. "And you just reminded everyone else how strong they can be, too." Maya gave a tiny smile through her tears. "I didn't know people would listen," she whispered. "They will," Keanu replied. "They just need someone brave enough to speak." She squeezed his hand one last time, then turned to join her classmates. And across the gym, the people who had come to be entertained left with something much more valuable. They had seen courage. Not loud, not violent, but steady and unforgettable. Blake sat at the edge of the mat, elbows resting on his knees, staring down at the foam sword resting on the floor beside him. The applause for Maya still echoed faintly in the background, but he barely heard it. His chest was tight, his throat burned. He didn't know what to do with his hands, so he just let them hang between his legs, clenched loosely. The hum of the gym faded to a blur. He wasn't looking at anything. Not the kids, not the parents, not the donors. He was just still. Still, in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in years. The cheers weren't for him. The respect wasn't for him. The eyes of admiration had turned elsewhere, toward the little girl who had just bowed in silence, toward the man who had stood beside her without needing a spotlight. He didn't hate Keanu. Not really. He hated what he saw in him, because it reminded him of what he used to want to be, before the followers, before the videos, Before it all became about attention, a shadow moved in front of him. Blake looked up slowly. Keanu stood just outside his peripheral vision, holding 2 water bottles. He offered one, wordlessly. Blake took it without speaking. Keanu sat down beside him on the edge of the mat. The two sat in silence for a long moment, staring out at the last few students bowing to their instructors, giggling, chattering, packing up their gear. "I didn't expect to feel like this," Blake finally muttered, unscrewing the cap of his water bottle. I thought if I could just be the best guy in the room, people would see it." Keanu nodded slowly, eyes still watching the floor. "I know that feeling," he said. Blake snorted under his breath. "I doubt that." Keanu turned toward him, but his voice never rose. "There was a time I made every room about myself. Every failure felt like exposure. Every compliment felt like oxygen. And if people didn't notice me, I thought maybe I didn't exist." Blake looked sideways at him. "Yeah, that's exactly it." Keanu smiled softly. "It's exhausting, isn't it?" Blake didn't respond. He didn't need to. Keanu leaned back on his palms, exhaling slowly. "You're talented," he said finally. "You've got power, form, even charisma." Blake shifted. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it to make you feel better," Keanu replied. "I'm saying it because it's true. But somewhere along the way, I think you forgot why you started." Blake blinked, his eyes beginning to sting. Keanu kept his tone calm, almost quiet. "This thing we do, it's not about the spotlight. It's about the torch we carry, the kind we pass on to others." Blake looked down at his hands again. "I used to want to be a great teacher," he whispered. "But then it all became about getting noticed." Keanu nodded again. "It's easy to lose track." Then he added something that caught Blake off guard. "I'd like to help you get certified." Blake turned sharply. "What?" "Officially," Keanu said. "Not just as a performer, as a martial arts teacher, one who leads with heart." Blake stared at him. The words didn't compute at first. "You'd pay for that?" Keanu nodded without hesitation. "I've seen a lot of instructors over the years. Some chase attention, some chase discipline. The best ones chase the truth inside themselves. I think you're ready for that." Blake opened his mouth to argue, to deflect, to say something sarcastic and self-protective, but nothing came out. Instead, his throat tightened. He blinked rapidly, his eyes glossy. "Why would you do that? After everything?" Keanu turned to him. "Because someone did it for me, when I didn't deserve it." He looked out across the emptying gym. "I was arrogant once. Thought I knew what mattered. Thought martial arts was about proving something. But my teacher saw past all that. He didn't punish me. He didn't shame me. He gave me another path." Blake wiped at his eyes, but the tears came anyway. Slow, uninvited, unstoppable. "I didn't know how far I'd drifted," he whispered. "I know," Keanu said gently. Blake shook his head, voice breaking. "It's not just the dojo. It's everything. I left my old school on bad terms. Thought I could make something bigger on my own. But somewhere along the way, I just stopped teaching. I started performing." Keanu nodded slowly. "And today, you stopped performing." Blake let out a shaky breath. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve and laughed weakly. "You're making me cry in front of everyone." "No one's watching," Keanu said, smiling. "And even if they are, they'll just see someone beginning again." Blake took another breath, then another. For the first time all day, he felt still, not in control, not in command, just present. "I want to be better," he said quietly. Keanu nodded. "Then start here." Blake looked around the gym at the scuffed mats, the folded gis, the posters peeling slightly on the wall. It wasn't a glamorous place, but it was honest. And it still had room for people willing to grow. "Will Harris even want me here after all this?" Blake asked. Keanu smiled. "He's been watching. I think he already knows." "Across the room, mister," Harris met their gaze. He didn't say anything, just gave a slow, simple nod. And in that gesture, Blake felt something settle in his chest. A beginning, a possibility. Keanu rose to his feet and offered Blake his hand, not as an opponent, not even as a teacher, but as an equal. Blake hesitated only for a second before taking it. Keanu pulled him up gently. "You've got something the kids need," Keanu said. "You just have to show them how to carry it." Blake nodded, still sniffling, still raw, but ready. They stood there together, two men who had both made mistakes, both failed in different ways, and now, both choosing something better, a path forward. And for the first time all day, Blake didn't feel like he needed to win. He just felt ready to grow, and that made all the difference. The closing ceremony began just after sunset. The gym lights dimmed slightly, creating a soft golden hue across the mats. Folding chairs had been arranged in rows for the parents and guests, and the children sat on the floor in front, still buzzing from the events of the day. Mr. Harris stood at the center, clipboard in hand, his voice echoing through the quieted space. "We are so proud of the work our students have done today," he said, smiling at the group. "And we're grateful for everyone who came to support this program." There were nods across the room. A few donors stood near the back, hands folded, whispering among themselves. One of them glanced toward Keanu, who was standing quietly near the wall, arms crossed, watching everything but saying nothing. Maya sat cross-legged near the front of the students, her chin resting on her fists, eyes still wide with inspiration. Mr. Harris continued, "As most of you know, we've been fighting to keep this school open. Rent, repairs, equipment. For a while, it felt like the clock was ticking." He paused. "But something happened today. Something none of us expected." He turned and looked at the table where the donation box had been sitting. "This morning, I opened an envelope that was handed to me by someone who asked to remain anonymous." He lifted the envelope slowly. It contained a certified donation in the amount of $250,000. The room gasped. The students looked around. Parents sat forward in their chairs. One mother put a hand to her mouth. "Not a loan," Mr. Harris said. "Not a pledge, a gift. One that will cover not just our operating expenses, but also new mats, scholarships, uniforms, and a complete renovation of the training space." A stunned silence filled the gym. Then, slowly, clapping began. It built second by second until the room swelled with cheers. Kids shouted, a few parents wiped their eyes. Even Tony let out a loud whistle from the back. Maya turned around to look at Keanu, her smile growing. She didn't need him to say it. She knew. "Mr." Harris looked down at the letter again, then read aloud a short message handwritten at the bottom of the donation slip. "This gift is made in honor of every student who trains to protect, not punish, and to every teacher who knows the difference." He paused. Then he added, "Whoever you are, thank you." Keanu remained by the wall, not moving. He didn't raise a hand, didn't take a bow, didn't claim credit. He just watched and smiled, softly. Maya stood up and walked over to him, her steps light but deliberate. She didn't say anything at first. She just hugged him, tight. Keanu knelt slightly to return it. "You saved our school," she whispered. "No," he said gently. "You did." He pulled back and looked her in the eye. "You're the reason it's worth saving." The applause continued, stretching beyond the usual polite length. But Keanu didn't linger. As Maya turned to rejoin her classmates, Keanu quietly stepped back toward the side exit of the gym, unnoticed by most. He moved like a shadow, calm and deliberate, slipping behind the folding curtain before the cameras could catch his expression or the donors could ask questions. He wasn't interested in being celebrated. Outside, the night air was crisp, filled with the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant street food from a vendor down the block. Keanu stood under the dim glow of the overhead light by the side door, hands in his pockets. For a moment, he just listened. The muffled cheers from inside still echoed faintly. Children laughing, someone tapping a microphone, life moving forward. He closed his eyes,
There was a kind of peace that settled over him in moments like this. Not the peace of approval, not the spotlight, but the quiet joy of knowing he had done the right thing, and no one had to know. He had always believed that true strength wasn't just in what you could lift, or how fast you could strike, or even how deeply you could inspire. True strength was what you did when no one was looking, what you gave without needing applause, what you repaired without needing credit. Inside, Mr. Harris was still speaking. I don't know who left this gift, but I hope they know they've given us more than just money. They've given us time. A second chance. In the back row, Blake remained seated on the edge of a folding chair, shoulders slumped, eyes red. He hadn't left since the incident. He hadn't spoken much. But now he sat watching the kids hug each other, whisper excitedly about new classes, about sparring again, about coming back next week. He caught sight of Maya spinning with one of the younger white belts, holding her hand out like a guide, gently correcting the way the girl held her stance. Blake exhaled. Something in him had shifted. He wasn't sure when. Maybe it was the quiet way Keanu had spoken to him. Maybe it was the raw gratitude in Maya's voice. Maybe it was the fact that Keanu had given so much and still walked away. Blake stood up. He walked toward the donation box, now empty, only the letter remaining under glass. He read the words again. Protect, not punish. He turned toward the back exit. Keanu was already gone. Across the city, Keanu sat in a modest rental car parked under a flickering streetlight. He hadn't told anyone where he was going next. Not the press, not his team, not even the assistant who usually arranged his schedule. He didn't need anyone to know. This wasn't for the world to applaud. This was for a little girl who once stood trembling in a circle of silence while everyone else laughed. This was for the boy who now had a second-hand uniform but a brand new spark in his eyes. This was for the future of something that had nothing to do with fame or fighting or winning, but everything to do with teaching kids how to stand tall without stepping on others. Keanu took a sip of water, placed the car in drive, and rolled slowly down the quiet street. Back in the gym, Maya reached down to pick up a fallen belt. As she did, she looked toward the doorway, her eyes scanning one last time. She smiled. She didn't need to see him again to know he'd been there. He had left something far more lasting than presence. He had left principle. The next morning, the gym floor still smelled faintly of celebration balloons deflated, folding chairs being stacked, scuff marks on the mats from all the footwork and commotion the night before. But something had shifted, and everyone felt it. Not just in the equipment or the banners, but in the energy of the place. It had changed. And so had the people. One by one, the reactions from the crowd began to surface parents, kids, even silent observers who had never spoken much during previous events. A father named Glenn, mid-40 seconds, with tired eyes and a crumpled program in his jacket pocket, stood near the vending machine by the front door. His son, Logan, was bouncing on the balls of his feet beside him, excitedly mimicking the slow-motion moves he'd seen Keanu perform on the mat. I came to see a show, Glenn murmured to another dad standing nearby, his voice tight with emotion. But I left with a lesson. He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He meant every word. Glenn had grown up on action films and believed strength meant being louder, tougher, faster. But watching Keanu stand calmly, never retaliating even as he was mocked only to rise when it mattered, had undone something inside him. He hadn't expected to cry in a school gym. But here he was, wiping his cheek with his sleeve as he watched his son copy slow, balanced movements with a kind of awe he hadn't seen before. Another woman, Marissa, had never set foot in the martial arts center until the event. She had been invited by her sister, who thought her 9-year-old needed discipline. Marissa had been hesitant, afraid, really. Her son Jordan had struggled with anger ever since his father left. She didn't want to put him in a place where fighting was taught. But last night had shattered that fear. She stood by the sign-up desk now, pen trembling slightly as she filled out the registration form. Jordan was beside her, quiet, his eyes still locked on the stage where Maya had spoken. You sure about this? The receptionist asked kindly.
Marissa nodded without hesitation. "I wasn't before," she said, "but I saw what strength looked like last night."
I want that in him.
Down the hallway, in the locker room where sweat and laughter had once mixed with the scent of cheap disinfectant, some of the older students were still processing everything. One of them, Elijah, 17 with a chip on his shoulder and a reputation for always pushing too hard, had gone home unusually quiet. This morning, he arrived earlier than anyone expected, and sat by the window, staring out into the parking lot, replaying every second of the match in his head. "I thought power was everything," he told his friend Marcus, stretching his legs slowly on the mat. But the way Keanu moved, it wasn't about power. It was about control. Marcus didn't reply. He just nodded, because he'd felt it too. That invisible shift, that deeper meaning behind every motion Keanu had made. In the main training room, Blake adjusted the class schedule pinned to the bulletin board. He didn't speak to anyone yet, but he moved with a softness that hadn't been there before. When the first kids entered, nervous about what to expect, they were met with something new. Blake bowed, not out of formality, but respect. He gestured them forward, his voice quiet. "Today," he said, "we're going to talk about why we train, not just how." The class began, and for the first time, they all leaned in to listen. Outside, the sun was rising slowly over the parking lot, catching on the glass doors as more families trickled in. Word had spread fast. What had started as a small local demonstration had turned into something deeper. People weren't just showing up for karate lessons anymore. They were showing up for answers. Near the front counter, a retired veteran named Charles sat with his granddaughter Lila. She was quiet, gripping his hand tightly as they waited for her orientation class to begin. "She was bullied bad last year," Charles explained to a staff member. "Used to cry before school. Thought about pulling her out altogether." He looked down at Lila. Her other hand held a small notebook, the same one she'd used to scribble drawings of fictional heroes and warriors, the only place she'd felt strong. "Then we watched what that man did last night. She asked me if someone like him would teach her how to stand tall without fighting." The staff member smiled. He already did. In the viewing lounge, a mother named Daphne was deep in conversation with two other parents. Her husband, a former football coach, sat nearby, unusually quiet. Daphne, normally outspoken, had been deeply moved. She kept replaying Maya's words in her mind. "You showed them what real strength looks like." That line had pierced through so many illusions. They had all been carrying ideas about success, about winning, about manhood and toughness. She had two sons. One of them, 13-year-old Cooper, had a temper that scared even her. But when he saw Keanu's calm, unwavering presence in the face of Blake's aggression, something shifted. That morning, he hadn't yelled when his little brother spilled milk. He had just cleaned it up and said, "It's fine." Daphne didn't say anything at the time, but in that moment, she had silently decided this place was going to be part of their future. In the locker area, a young instructor named Nate leaned against the wall, talking to an older student. He was processing the night just like everyone else. Unlike some of the parents, he had been there through all of Blake's training. He had admired him once, idolized him even. But after last night, something inside Nate had cracked wide open. "I thought being strong meant pushing harder," he admitted. But Keanu, he was still. He made stillness more powerful than any kick. His student nodded slowly. He made kindness look dangerous, the boy added. Like, in a good way. At the front entrance, an old woman left a flower near the reception counter. No one knew who she was, but she whispered something as she placed it down. For the teacher who didn't yell, as the day went on, quiet moments rippled across the center. Small signs that what happened the night before wasn't just entertainment, it was transformation. And by the time the final student left that afternoon, Blake stood in the empty dojo alone, bowing once again to the mat. Not for himself, not for Keanu, but for the lesson that had humbled him. Because in a world that often rewarded volume and showmanship, something sacred had taken root in silence, and it was beginning to grow. The lights in Keanu's home were dimmed low. A single lamp glowed beside a worn leather chair in the corner of his study. On a small side table sat a black, leather-bound journal, its edges frayed, its pages thick with time. Keanu reached for it slowly, his fingers brushing over the cover like greeting an old friend. He opened it to a blank page, then sat for a moment, just breathing. He hadn't written in weeks, maybe months, but something about today had shaken something loose. Not in a painful way, but in a quietly necessary one. His pen hovered, then dropped gently to the paper. "I'm still learning," he wrote. "After all this time, I'm still learning the same lesson." He paused. Today had started as a simple favor, a visit to a dojo, a chance to speak about discipline, focus, kindness, values that had guided him through the chaos of fame and loss. But it had become so much more. There had been anger, a challenge, a fight avoided, then accepted, then transcended. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memory of Blake's face pass through his mind, the fury, the disbelief, the shame. And then, the moment that mattered most, when Blake had broken down, not because he was defeated, but because he had finally seen himself clearly. Keanu exhaled and kept writing. "I saw myself in Blake today, not the man I am now, but the man I once was. I saw pride, fear, the aching need to be respected. I know that need. I carried it like armor when I was younger, convinced it would keep me safe, but it only made me lonely." He turned to a new page. The silence in the room was soft, almost sacred. "There was a time I fought to prove something. I fought because someone mocked me publicly, and I let it burn inside me. I lashed out, not with fists, but with words sharp enough to wound. And when I walked away, even though the crowd cheered, I felt small. I knew I had lost something more important than the argument." That moment, long buried, resurfaced with clarity. He had been a rising actor then, his name just starting to spread. One interview, one sarcastic jab from a critic about his ability, and he had responded harshly. Not to the man, but in a televised interview that reached millions. It earned headlines, but it also earned regret. He hadn't spoken of it since. His sensei had found out. Not through the press, but by instinct. That night, in the dojo, the old man had not raised his voice. Instead, he sat across from Keanu and poured tea. "Your power is not in your hands or your tongue," the sensei had said. "It is in your silence." Keanu remembered staring into the cup, ashamed. "But he disrespected me." The sensei had nodded once. "And when the ego is gone, the warrior is born." He'd never forgotten that. Keanu wrote the words down now, as if inscribing them for the first time. When the ego is gone, the warrior is born. He looked at the ink, bleeding into the page, and wondered how many of the kids in that dojo today had ever heard something like that. He hoped they would remember the silence, the restraint, the moment the noise ended and dignity began. Keanu turned to a fresh page, the smooth paper calming his thoughts. He began writing again, slower this time, each word shaped by emotion. "I looked at those kids today and wondered who among them was about to give up. I saw it in their eyes, the weight of silence, of not feeling seen, not feeling enough, especially Maya. She stood so small in the corner, but when she stepped forward, she carried more strength than any adult in that room." He paused. Her words echoed in his mind. "You showed them what real strength looks like. Real strength." He underlined it in his journal. Not the kind that seeks attention, not the kind that needs to be the loudest, but the kind that holds steady when others falter. The kind that shows up in moments of fear, not to overpower, but to protect. Keanu leaned back and glanced at the window. The moonlight filtered in, painting silver across the hardwood floor. Somewhere out there, those kids were probably asleep, still buzzing from the energy of the day. Maybe some were dreaming of future belts, of becoming teachers themselves. He smiled faintly and wrote, "If even one of them wakes up tomorrow believing they matter not because of what they can do with their fists, but because of who they choose to be, then today was worth everything." A name came to his mind then. Kim. He hesitated, then let his pen move. I kept thinking about you today, Kim. I always do. But today, more than usual. You were the quiet one between us, but somehow you always knew what to say. I think you would have laughed at me, showing up in a gi again after all these years. You always teased me about how serious I looked in one. His eyes softened. The ache was still there, years later, but it didn't crush him like it used to. It lived beside the gratitude now. I wonder if you would have smiled, watching me in that dojo. Not for the match, but for how I walked away. For the girl who found her voice. For the man who found his again. He didn't need an answer. He felt it in the stillness. Keanu wrote one final line before gently closing the journal. Strength doesn't shout, it listens. He held the book to his chest for a moment, then stood. The night was quiet. The world didn't know what had happened in that small martial arts school. There were no headlines, no interviews, just lives slightly changed, hearts slightly opened, paths slightly redirected. That was enough. As he walked out of the study, Keanu left the journal resting on the table. The lamp stayed on, casting a warm glow on the cover. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful moments in life are the ones that never ask to be seen. They just wait quietly to be felt. The photo appeared online 2 days later. No press release, no scheduled drop. Just a quiet image posted by a bystander who had been at the ceremony. In the center of the dojo floor, Keanu and Blake stood facing each other. They weren't posing. They weren't smiling for the camera. They were bowing. Heads lowered in mutual respect, their hands clasped in a firm handshake between them. Keanu wore a soft expression, eyes steady. Blake, on the other hand, looked like a man transformed, calmer, less guarded. Something in his posture had shifted. It wasn't just about martial arts anymore. The caption was simple: humility, strength, redemption. Within hours, the photo had gone viral. News outlets picked it up and ran with sensational headlines. Actor school's martial artist in humility. Keanu's silent lesson becomes a loud message. Hollywood star brings honor back to the mat. But it wasn't the headlines that mattered. It was what people were saying underneath. One mother commented, "My son was at that school. He came home saying he wants to be like Keanu, not because he's famous, but because he listens." Another said, "That handshake? That's what men should teach their sons." A few trolls tried to stir things up, mocking Blake, calling it a publicity stunt. But they were drowned out quickly by voices from the community, parents, students, instructors from other dojos who had seen Blake's style before and recognized the change in him. And then, quietly, Keanu posted a statement to his own page. It wasn't dramatic, just a short paragraph beneath the same photo. This wasn't about proving a point, it was about remembering one. Blake and I both taught something that day, and both learned something. That's the beauty of martial arts. It's never finished teaching you. The comment section exploded not with celebrity worship, but with gratitude. Veterans thanked him for honoring the values of discipline and respect. Teachers wrote in about how they'd shown the image to their students. Even a retired sensei from Okinawa left a simple message: "This is the spirit I trained for." But perhaps the most unexpected ripple came from Blake himself. 2 weeks after the match, he reopened his Saturday morning schedule. But instead of filling it with private students and high-ticket seminars, he changed everything. Flyers went up around the city. Free weekend classes for inner-city youth. Come as you are. Learn to be more. And under that, just 2 names. Instructor, Blake Archer assistant, Maya Lopez. At the first session, 8 kids showed up. Maya wore her belt with pride, standing beside Blake, her chin up, her eyes steady. She helped the younger ones with basic stances, adjusted their footing, taught them how to bow with sincerity. Blake didn't bark orders that morning. He didn't show off or push for dominance. He knelt beside a boy who struggled with balance and simply said, "It's okay. I used to fall a lot too." The dojo was quieter than usual that morning, filled not with the usual thunderous ki-eyes, but with the soft shuffle of sneakers on mats and the nervous energy of first-timers. Blake moved slowly, deliberately, pausing often to crouch down and meet each child at eye level. The fiery arrogance he once carried was replaced with something more powerful: presence. One boy, around 9, hesitated at the entrance. He clung to his mother's hand, his oversized hoodie swallowing his frame. Maya noticed first and walked over. "Hey," she said gently, kneeling. "You want to see something cool?" She showed him a slow, fluid kata move, letting him mimic her motion. When he smiled, she smiled wider. That boy didn't leave the mat the whole session. After class, a few parents lingered, watching from the doorway with folded arms and eyes full of disbelief. Some had known Blake from before. Others had only heard stories, but none had seen him like this gentle, patient, open. One father approached him with quiet intensity. "My son's been bullied. We tried everything. Therapy, moving schools. He shuts down when he feels weak." Blake placed a hand over his heart. "He's not weak. He just hasn't been shown what strength really looks like." The man nodded. No more words needed. That evening, another photo made the rounds. This one, more subtle. Blake tying a white belt around the waist of a girl who couldn't stop giggling while Maya beamed beside them. There was no press, no reporters. Just a proud mom snapping a moment she knew her daughter would remember forever. Keanu never commented on the photo. In fact, he was already gone by then, back home, away from the buzz, true to his nature. But his impact lingered. Blake wrote his own post that weekend. Short and raw. "I forgot why I started teaching. I forgot what my sensei once said, that the loudest person in the room usually has the most to hide. Keanu reminded me, this class isn't for show anymore. It's for them, for the kids who need to believe in something bigger than their fists." That message reached far beyond the city. Martial arts forums began sharing Blake's transformation as a case study. Instructors around the country messaged him, asking how to start similar free programs. Some even offered mats, uniforms, or funding. One dojo in Detroit renamed their outreach program Project Maya. The ripple continued. Maya's school gave her an award for community leadership. The same girl who had once been teased for training with that angry guy was now celebrated for helping lead one of the most compassionate dojos in the city. She accepted the award in her white gi, holding it up and simply saying, "It's not just about kicking. It's about showing up." By the time the month ended, the handshake photo had been printed on posters across dozens of dojos. It wasn't because of celebrity hype. It was because people saw themselves in it, the need for second chances, the courage to change, the quiet dignity of mutual respect. It wasn't just a handshake, it was a story in itself. And every time someone looked at it, they didn't just see Keanu or Blake. They saw what humility looked like when it reached out and was met halfway. There's a difference between noise and resonance, between show and spirit. And in that quiet dojo, long after the cheers faded and the news headlines slowed to a crawl, something deeper remained. Something that couldn't be captured in a photo or measured by how many shares a video received. It was the stillness left behind when real humility walks through a room and doesn't need to announce itself. Keanu didn't need applause. In fact, he had slipped out the back exit while the crowd was still clapping for someone else. That was the point all along. True strength, the kind that doesn't bruise or belittle, doesn't come from dominance. It comes from understanding, the kind of strength that kneels beside a fallen man and lifts him without judgment. That's the kind of strength that transforms a community, not just a moment. Martial arts were never supposed to be about hurting others. At their root, they were about discipline, restraint, and harmony. But over time, especially in places where egos outshouted ethos, that meaning became distorted. Trophies replaced teachings. Titles replaced integrity. Blake's dojo had nearly become another cautionary tale of that slow erosion until someone reminded them of the truth in the most unexpected way. It wasn't through a lecture. It wasn't through punishment or revenge. It came through a man who had every reason to humiliate, but instead offered a hand. Keanu's greatest lesson wasn't how he moved, but why he stayed still, why he listened, why he waited until the right moment to speak, not with words, but with actions that echoed. And that's where it starts. The turning of the tide. One act of quiet power that humbles the loudest room. One choice to restore dignity instead of erasing someone. One refusal to chase the spotlight and instead use it to illuminate those left in the dark. People who had once come for a flashy celebrity appearance left with something far greater, a mirror. One that made them question how they treated others, how they defined strength, how they raised their kids to respond when power was in their hands. A father who had arrived to record a viral clip now signed his son up for lessons, not to win belts, but to build character. A mother who once dismissed martial arts as violence now cried watching Maya bow before her new students, not to fight, but to protect. And Maya, she bloomed. Not because Keanu carried her, but because he reminded her she already had strength inside. She just needed someone to stand beside her until she could see it for herself. These are the stories that never make the highlight reels. The ones that don't trend overnight, but they live longer. They settle into the bones of a community. They get passed down not just as tales, but as truths. And maybe that's the legacy we're all building. Blake had once believed strength was something you shouted, that you had to dominate every room you walked into, make your name louder than your mistakes. But after that handshake with Keanu, after that bow captured on a stranger's cell phone camera and posted across the internet, something inside him changed. Not because of shame, but because of grace. He watched that photo go viral. At first, he braced himself for mockery. But the world didn't mock him. Instead, they saw a man who had the courage to learn, to bend, not break. And when Keanu released that short statement, "We both taught something," Blake couldn't stop staring at those words, not out of guilt, but gratitude. Because someone as revered as Keanu had chosen to share the dignity of that moment, not steal it. The following week, Blake launched something unexpected. A free weekend class, open to inner-city kids who couldn't afford tuition. No uniforms required, no belts. Just one promise. You'll leave stronger than you came in, but not because you fought harder, because you listened deeper. Maya became his assistant. Her confidence quiet, her movements fluid, her voice stronger than ever. That's the ripple effect of real humility. It doesn't demand the room's attention. It shifts the entire room's direction. Keanu had said nothing to the press after the story broke. No interviews, no red carpet appearances to capitalize on the praise. But that's exactly what kept the conversation alive. In a world addicted to validation, his silence became the loudest message of all. And somewhere, back in his home filled with books and music and memories, Keanu wrote another journal entry. No headlines, no signature, just ink on paper. He reflected on the words of his old sensei. The strongest warrior is the one who can hold back his sword. Keanu had held back more than that. He'd held back his fame, his pride, his urge to correct people publicly. And in doing so, he made space for transformation not only in Blake, but in the entire community. The martial arts school, once known for its trophies, now became known for its values. Parents began to ask different questions at orientation. Not, how fast will my kid earn a black belt? But what kind of person will my child become here? One mother wrote a letter. My son used to be angry. Now, after just 3 weeks, he tells me, Mom, I want to protect people, not hurt them. That's more than martial arts. That's healing. Even the mayor mentioned the story at a community event, not because of the viral moment, but because of the quiet consistency that followed it. A story of how one man's choice to stay humble reshaped a town's understanding of power. So maybe the lesson isn't in the punch, or the pose, or even the bow. Maybe it's in what comes after the silence that lingers when ego steps aside and character steps forward. Because the loudest strength is the one that doesn't need applause. Have you ever seen real humility in action? Share it below. What story should we tell next about Keanu Reeves' quiet strength? Comment, respect over ego, if this story moved you. Thank you. See you in the next video.